Hail, hail, the Celts are here, and we have got two legends of the Celtic football fan media community space, if that's a bit of a tongue twister. I tried to say it all in there, but Celtic fans online talking about Celtic, analysing Celtic and everything else. I've got Alan Morrison and Juco James from the Huddle Breakdown joining us. I've had the pleasure of being on the Huddle Breakdown a couple of times as a guest, and now I've got the honour of welcoming them over to our place. Alan and James, great to see you. Hail, hail. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, brilliant. It's you picked a great day. For miserabilists like us, you picked a perfect day.
No, it's shameful that it's taken this long for us to reciprocate. So you've been more than generous in joining our show. So it's about time that we came on one of your shows. So thanks for having us.
And like Alan said, I've picked my moment here. We've got new manager Wilfried Nancy in charge, and this appointment's been on the wall for a little while, and I was thinking ahead to I'm going to want to talk to some people and get some thoughts and feelings and opinions on how the Nancy era could unfold that are not just my own, obviously, but on the channel we love to get extra insight in here. And top of the list had to be you guys, so I'm very, very grateful that you've accepted the offer to come back over here. And it should be a great one. And thanks again, huge fan, and glad you guys could come down and hang out for this one. I'm kind of all over the place, apologies. But if you're not familiar with Alan and James, the channel that they put all their content on, Huddle Breakdown, all the links to that will be in the description of the video. And round about the channel icons are, you should be able to click on it and go directly over there. So feel free to check them out. But like you say, we're in the aftermath. We're in the day after, the night before, from Celtic versus Hearts, Nancy's first game in charge. And the first thing I wanted to chew over with you guys or hear from yourselves on is really just your first impression of Wilfried Nancy and Nancy Ball now that we've had the Hearts game.
Well, age before beauty, Alan. You go first.
So listen, one thing we try and do, I say try, maybe not always succeed, is you have to place everything into the context. So let's just take a step back for a second and just remember, before we get into the weeds about Wilfried Nancy and the first game and the Hearts game, let's just take a beat about where we are and why we got to here. And I don't mean, I'm not going to go back to 1888, don't worry. But, Dermot Desmond at a point this season decided to kind of blow up Celtic season, right? Brendan Rodgers was resigned, and suddenly, Celtic needed a new manager. Now, that in itself may well have been the right decision. And if you look at what then subsequently transpired in terms of Desmond's statement on Celtic's official website, the public data says to me that nothing has been said or written that refutes anything that Desmond put in that missive. Now, if we accept that to be true, which I believe it is, then is it too much of a reach to suggest that there might have been a grain, like a scintilla of truth in some of what was being claimed by Desmond? And if that is the case, then is it fair then to assume that behind the scenes at Celtic, in the club itself, it was a very unhappy place, and therefore, it would therefore make sense that Celtic move on from that relationship. Okay, so then we have Martin O'Neill, 73 years old, being brought out of what seemed to have been a very happy retirement to front up on an interim basis, while Celtic spent their usual interminable amount of time trying to source a replacement for what was obviously a very well planned and thought out transition from Brendan Rodgers to the new manager. And Martin O'Neill, club legend, always will be. What he definitely did is he made that unhappy place more of a happy place, and it seemed that the players were happier. The team had a much better energy about it, and there was a more positivity about the way that Celtic were playing, and that was all great. And then, of course, the results were generally good. The outcomes were great. Now, the performances were slightly different in the sense that, we moved away from 4 years of heavy positional possession-based football to something quite slightly different, actually quite different if you look at the numbers, in terms of a lot more direct, a lot less control. In fact, the way that Celtic were playing under Martin O'Neill was more synonymous with how we had been playing under Neil Lennon than it was under Rodgers and Postecoglou. So a shift in playing dynamic, but it yielded good results. But also, under Brendan Rodgers this season, Celtic had an expected goal difference, which was about 6 goals better than what was actually achieved on the pitch, meaning that, between goals conceded, goals scored, we probably underperformed by around a goal difference around 6. That's quite a big chunk actually for 20 odd games. Under
Yeah.
Martin O'Neill, that switched round, and we actually had over 8 games a nearly 8 goal difference between goal difference that we expected to see based on chances created, and goal difference that was actually achieved. That's a goal a game better than what we expected. That's brilliant. We all love this variance, but it is variance. Now, some of it might be down to just having a happier group of players, and Martin O'Neill's man management is undoubtedly superb, and that must have had a wholly positive impact on the squad. But you saw at the end of that Dundee game that we'd stopped rotating in the middle of an insane set of fixtures, and the players were out on their feet, and we almost lost a 1-0 lead to Dundee. We don't need to talk about the St Mirren game, the Hibs game, the League Cup semi-final second half, the Midtjylland game, etc. Nothing but credit is due to Martin O'Neill here, but I don't think simply carrying on was going to be the answer either in terms of the underlying performances. And no harm to Martin O'Neill at all, because again, he had no input into the shape of the squad, the quality of the players available to him. So then we move on finally to Wilfried Nancy, and he, as far as I'm aware, made no public utterances about joining Celtic. There was nothing in the media about him joining Celtic. It was all speculated on stateside. But as far as I can tell, he completed the season with his club. And he waited patiently for negotiations to occur. What I'm trying to say is he appears to have acted entirely honourably in this process. He wasn't agitating for a move. He wasn't agitating to leave Columbus Crew. Everybody seems to have been happy. It's taken a long time. There may be some good reasons for that we don't know about. And of course, it's not unprecedented. We've had managerial change during a season, but I'm not sure it's happened quite in this way. When Lennon left, the season was done anyway. And I don't know if maybe you have to go back to John Barnes, possibly, has been the last time that Celtic made such a managerial switch, mid-season like that. I think when Mowbray left again, the season was pretty much done at that point. So we're in kind of uncharted waters here, and we have a coach who, nobody really knows anything about, has never managed in Europe, despite the fact he is European, and has a very distinctive style of play, and is obviously the modern coach many people have been kind of asking for. And by modern, I mean his coaching principles are grounded in modern philosophies of how you treat people in general, looking at development, looking at processes, looking at performance, and being anchored in the things that you can impact, not the things you can't impact. So all of that thinking is right up there with how most elite sports people operate in any sport, right? But he's obviously been dropped into this situation, and he's had very few days on the training ground. Now he's chosen very bravely against Hearts to implement his playing style on the team in terms of the basic shape and setup, and that was very brave. And we'll now be anchored, I suspect, in the outcome of that game to say that it was very stupid. But I think I just don't think that's the right way to look at it. I think the reason I've laid all that out is that this is an unprecedented in modern times set of circumstances. It's not really Nancy's fault that he is in this situation, and he similarly, like O'Neill, hasn't been able to choose the players that he wants yet. And if we're going to lose our shit every time Celtic, lose a game over the next 2 or 3 weeks, this is going to be an almost impossible season for everybody. I've just watched the game back, and there was howls and derision when, quite audible when some of these through balls weren't being played. And we'll get into the performance. I'll let James have his say, and we'll get into the actual performance itself. And then, of course, once the goal goes in, it's almost it felt like a complete kind of meltdown of feeling. And I might be reading that wrong through the TV screen, and people that were at the game will no doubt some people might not agree with that, and that's fine. But it didn't feel like a terribly supportive environment. And I just think we've got a group of players who clearly are of a lower quality than what we're used to, who have been struggling in a really bad environment for most of the season, who have been on a re-energizing but exhausting run under the inspirational Martin O'Neill, and now have to adapt to yet more change under what is an inexperienced coach, but a coach who has very definite ideas about how he wants to play and appears to have the ability to communicate his ideas with clarity if he's given time to do so. And I just think we all just need to get behind it and try and be as positive as we can, because the alternative is awful, and it won't help anybody if we're always on the players' backs, if we're always on each other's throats, and we're not giving the likes of Konecki and Nigren and Hatate and players who seem to suffer from confidence highs and lows, depending. I mean, some of it's driven by the reactions that they're getting. I think we just need to get behind them and give this a go. I really do.
Fair enough. James, first impressions?
Actually, very positive. That's the irony here, is that the gulf between and it's a lazy comparison, but I'll use it nonetheless. Is after the first game under Ange at Tynecastle, where we ironically lost 2-1. And you could clearly see what he was trying to do already. And he had some preseason at least. I think the only new signing that played in that game, was Carl Starfelt, who was just off the plane, who was directly involved with losing the game with a bad mistake. And I think Kyogo might have come on as a sub, and maybe Abada a little bit. But it was not Ange's team that we all kind of remember now. And, with the additions of Matt O'Reilly and Hatate and Maeda and Moy. And so the reason why I'm referencing this is that, and I've talked about this a lot on our shows, Quinny, is we simplify history based off of outcomes. And then we come up with these narratives and remember things kind of in certain ways that don't really reflect the pathway of how history is created. Right. I mean, it's an extreme example, like, hey, we won World War II. Well, there was a lot that happened from the start of that to the end that had ups and downs and, whatever. So we all remember the Ange period as this glowing, wonderful stretch. And there's a lot of ups and downs there in the first 5 months, even. As late as October, I think 10th, we were 6th in the table, and people were calling. Remember, he's going to be fired by Christmas, and he was getting adversarial with the media, and a lot of the support didn't like him getting hired anyway, because who's this no-name guy who didn't even have his credentials to manage in Europe, right? So we forget all of that, because it ended up turning out really well, and he's a cult of personality and beloved. That a lot of it ended up flipping anyway. So that's all outcome bias, as they say, in the realm of cognition and human analysis. So I think Nancy was set up to fail here unless he was perfect. Meaning that the fact that they didn't get him in ahead of the Dundee game, I think, was a big mistake, because a lot of the kinks and problems hello. Again, you're a tactics guy, you're a coach, Quinny. I mean, to be dropped into this and have a couple of days, and I agree with Alan, brave, some will call it naive, whatever you want to call it. He switched some things up, because that's what he does. Like, you're not going to have a guy come in and completely change the way that he manages. Martin O'Neill didn't do that, by the way. Martin O'Neill parachuted in and then made the switches, like Alan said, to what he's kind of used to, because that's what coaches do. They think, well, I'm going to tweak this here, and this is how I do things, and this is how I think we can do some things better. To think that that's going to happen instantaneously, as it did under Martin O'Neill, by the way, right? So again, we kind of lucked out in winning some games there that were really ugly, like St. Mirren, where very easily could have been a draw. Hibs very easily could have been a draw or a loss. So I think he was kind of set up to fail here. I think we had an anchoring of this narrative around Martin O'Neill had turned the team into a winning team. That's outcome bias. That as Alan said, that we don't focus on outcomes only. Of course, outcomes are the only thing that matters ultimately, but the predictive going forward is about underlying performance. The same reason why Alan and I were talking about Hearts aren't going to keep this rate up earlier in the season, because they were not performing at a level that were going to keep them at a 90-point pace in the league. They were going to go through some games where they drew, whereas, Kizervides doesn't, score a top shelf goal from 30 yards to pull it out for Derek McInnes, right? So that's just the way these things work when you're performing kind of dicey levels versus dominant. And that's what Alan was saying. The last 4 years, there was huge stretches of time where Celtic were dominant in their performance, and not only dominant, but consistently so. So the reason why I'm optimistic is I see what he's trying to do. I had looked at him at what he'd done at Columbus Crew. I'm actually surprised at how fast he was able to get these players to do a lot of these things as well as they even did. So to me, that's the brave, naive line. I would have probably gone a little more conservative than he ended up doing, but I'm pleasantly surprised with how well things went in certain ways. I think what he'll find out or figure out quickly is that probably some of the legacy information he got from because again, you're in the door 2 days and you're going to talk to the guys that are already there. Like, what do you think? What's going on? Like, should I make this change or whatever? And I think he's going to realize quickly that their anchoring is not in the way that he thinks about the game. And I'll be charitable in that characterization. And then he's going to make what might seem to be radical changes pretty quickly. But they're not radical if you understand what he did. And I know you've looked at it, Quinny. If you look at what he did at Columbus Crew and how he plays and how it's not a back three in the orthodox sense where you have three big, Shane Duffy at right center back and a back three, like Lennon tried to do initially. His center backs are basically like fullbacks. So, when you really analyze how he set things up, there's going to be growing pains. There's going to be problems. But I'm optimistic because I get what he's doing. And I do think we have the raw material to do it a lot better than we even performed against Hearts on Sunday. And the performance actually wasn't that bad. Like, it wasn't great. I'm not trying to, urinate on people and tell them it's raining. So there were definitely parts of it that were problematic, but it wasn't that bad. And it was, I think you can't argue that it was worse than what we played against St. Mirren or against Hibs on an underlying performance basis. We just had some bad mistakes. And I joked before we went live, Engel's header straight at the Hibs keeper went in. This one got saved, right? So when you're talking about a low sport game or low scoring sport, and in a game where it's close, like it was on Sunday, a couple of these breaks, one way or the other, Kasper Schmeichel is a potted plant on a corner and does not get across his line, which he's increasingly not doing at his age and fitness level, on a header from, what was that, 15 yards? I mean, that's not something that you're real happy about from your keeper play perspective, from a corner. So these kind of things lead to outcome bias. So and again, Alan and I've talked a lot about it. There's a lot of risks here because of the cauldron in which he's being dropped, and he's been dropped. And there's absolutely a scenario where he's a chancer and full of it and whatever. All those things are plausibly possible. I don't see that yet. And what I saw Sunday was actually encouraging to where we're going to get to. And I see a pathway there. So that to me is at least coherent. And I don't think sticking with Martin O'Neill would not have coherent, because we do not have the players to be playing chaos ball. I mean, the idea that we would have played Hearts and played Martin O'Neill style play and it would have been better than what we saw, I think is kind of crazy, because that's what they're good at. They're good at shelling the ball back and forth and winning second balls in midfield. And for the most part, we didn't allow that on Sunday. I mean, that was, even with all of the transition and the risks, for the most part, we controlled the game to a level that I think is actually kind of stunning, given, he was just in the door, and that we still have a lot of problems on player fit and I think he got a couple of things wrong, understandably, that he'll adjust to quickly. So positive, I guess. I'm sorry. I'm usually the downbeat guy, but I'm, and it could be my own confirmation bias, because I thought it was a smart hire, with caveats that he was being set up in a really tough spot. So I just hope he's given the time, and I agree with Alan. Like, the hysteria about things, the tactics board, all this nonsense. I mean, it's just, I hope it settles down a little bit. I hope he gets, a trophy quickly next weekend. And hopefully that'll, calm things down a bit, as it ultimately do with Ange. But this is a much tougher situation than even Ange inherited, I think.
Yeah. I think I can speak for a lot of subscribers on my channel, and certainly of yours as well. Obviously, I'm a subscriber over at the Huddle Breakdown, where you normally get a lot of the fans and the subscribers on our channel, certainly a bit more even keels, a bit more wait and see a wee bit of the process coming out and see some results. I think we've had the Ange experience, we've kind of seen this ourselves, and there's a few things you have both said there that I really do echo and would like to come back to you on, because what you were mentioning, Alan, in terms of like do you know the feeling I had, right? Because I was doing this, I'm sure you guys were as well. Seeing like the first 20 minutes, you were really focusing on the whole team. Where is this guy? Who's he passing to? Where's this guy running? And it felt to me that the whole stadium was doing that. Like everyone was completely tuned in. And see, without that goal coming to waking everyone up, to bring the crowd into the game, when Hearts' goal goes in first, like you said there, it just felt like something popped, or something just kind of gave in a little bit. And I think whatever all that was, I think that kind of got onto the pitch, if that makes sense. And I think then you're talking about the stuff we're chatting about before, like, or James brought up Engels, hits the header right of the Hibs keeper, goes through him, Hearts keeper, he saves it, and that's, you kind of walk into some of those margins. And when you mentioned like the Ange, like Hearts, we scored a goal against Hearts, so again, we'd had a little bit of that intrigue and, what's this guy up to? And then the ball breaks. And again, like you say, in terms of how you remember everything, all I need to do to remember that early Ange time is just utter the name Owen Moffat. And as soon as I do that, I remember the early stages of Ange very quickly. Like, I remember playing Adam Montgomery left wing, Abada up front, Scales at left back. Like there was Sorrow in midfield.
Bolin Broly got a game in
Sorrow
September.
Sorrow was in midfield in that game in Hearts. Yeah. Listen, I'm exactly with you, right? I was actually the first 20-25 minutes, I was actually, if I say astounded, I am over egging it, but I was really quite, pleased with how this was going. If you watch some of the play, I was getting a little bit giddy. If you watch the opening 20-25 minutes, there were times when, the right midfielder Engels was playing on the left wing. There was an overload there, and Yang was completely free, holding his width on that side, and Tierney was advanced to Netke, and we'd basically broken their defence, and that's exactly what he's looking for. It's exactly those moments he's looking for. We created two great chances from early long balls. Again, that's all in the armory. There's no such thing short ball, long ball. It's just the right ball and the wrong ball, and they were the right ball to play. I was very enthused. But then when how many times Nygren, Engels, Tierney, Hatate had simple passes under no pressure to play, to slot between the lines, and we fluffed them every single time. That kills you as a coach. Yeah. We've got into the great position. We've got a creative player in that sort of zone outside the penalty area, in a position to play a through ball, and we've butchered every single one. So that and then I was just checking there. I might be wrong in this, but I don't think Martin O'Neill in his time, I don't think the team went a goal down other than in Midtjylland, right? And this is such a fragile team. It's such a fragile team.
Feyenoord, you're right. You're right.
Oh yeah, sorry, Feyenoord. Yeah, that has to be acknowledged as a superb performance. Absolutely, 100%. This is a fragile team, and the thing is, as soon as that goal went in, players started to take too much responsibility, which is a sign of stress. They started to hang on to the ball too long. The ball wasn't being pinged one touch. It was run with it, then release it. And
shelling crosses.
Started to batter crosses into the box rather than, as Nancy said, to pass the ball, which I love that. Like, pass the ball into the box, don't thrash it across the box. And what does that tell you? You know, that after 2 training sessions, there is no resilience to this. And that's so important. We got to the point with Ange Ball that, you know, there was absolute resilience in the system. You're a goal behind, there's 20 minutes to go, you bring Giakoumakis, Abada, Jota off the bench, whatever, and you keep going and you keep going and you keep going, and then you win 3-1, right? And we saw it happen, you know, numerous times where it was 0-0 going into the second half, and then you just get overwhelmed. If we can play at this pace that we were playing for the first 25 minutes, and the players can get this positional rotation, this kind of ability to be a bit more sort of what they call relational. It just means really making not holding rigid positions in lanes, but actually recognizing that if I go over here, there's an overlap. I mean, there was a comical moment when Engels, McGregor, and I can't remember who it was, Tinecki, had a 3 against 2 on the left-hand side, and they didn't have a clue what to do. Well, again, there's no resilience in the system. There can't be after 2 training sessions. So we have to let him build resilience into the system, such that, you know, under stress, i.e., goal a goal behind, the players just carry on and they keep going and they keep going and they keep going. And then we have to build, you know, and then he has to get better quality on the pitch. Again, all the things I talked about butchering all those chances in the final third, Maeda missing the chances that he missed. You know, we are crying out for more quality in the final third. That's not Nancy's fault. That wasn't Rodgers' fault. That, you know, it wasn't Martin O'Neill's fault. It's on the club. We've not provided the tools for the managers to do the job. And that's going to take time. And anybody that we get in January, by the way, may take a number of months to assimilate into the squad, into Scotland, into the culture, and all of that stuff. So we're going to have to be patient here. I'm sorry, there's no way around this. But, you know, what I would say is the good news. The good news is, and this is not a criticism of Derek McInnes, it's not a criticism of Hearts, but it's very difficult for them to go on long unbeaten runs playing this way because it's chaos ball. There's not enough, as James says, there's not enough gap between goals and expected goals, for and against, for you to overcome the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune on a football pitch on a week by week by week basis. You cannot give over 2 XG away at home to Kilmarnock and expect to win the league. You cannot you can't go to places and be, you know, minus 1.3 XG and expect to win every week. It won't happen. You cannot play at home to, you know, Dundee or whatever and not even register like 0.5 XG and expect to win the league if that's your consistent level of performance. And that's not a criticism of them. It's just how McInnes has them playing, and he'll live or die by that sword. So it's all there for Celtic, but we're going to have to be patient.
Yeah, I think so. The other thing I wanted to kind of bring into something you brought up, James, was legacy info, right? Because the only legacy kind of part of the operation still in the dugout coming into this is everyone's favourite Strachan, our boy Gavin, iPads and laptops and whatever else he's up to. And he very much, you know, seemed to be a hand on the wheel coming into the team in terms of the match type of operation. I'm very much I'm kind of want to bring that in alongside what you have mentioned. I was very impressed in the early 20 minutes, quite surprised at how quickly he actually managed to get some of this stuff onto the pitch. And even when we were 2-0 down, like Johnny Kenny for Negren as an individual substitution, we could probably chat about forever, right? But if you look at the tactics board when he was doing it, he's went 2 up top. He still kept the 2 midfielders in behind. He's basically just taken a further man from further back in the pitch and, you know, screw that, get another man into the box and go for it. And that's the sort of thing we've been really crying out for, is a bit of, you know, like proactive, you know, trying to go for it if you need to in the game sort of thing. So that was welcomed. But the other thing I wanted to kind of say on legacy info is Paul John said this to me today on Axum. I can't remember if it was when we were on or afterwards. I think it was when we were on. But obviously guys like Tinecki and Negren have been like Paul Tisdale signings, or they've been like the club signings, you would imagine, that sort of thing. He's clearly still in the building and doing everything now. Do you think that there's maybe, you know, should these players maybe fit into the man? Is there maybe an expectation that more of the team should fit the manager now, do you think? Because the manager should be now being picked by the same guys been picking the players, if I can say that in a coherent way.
Yeah, again, you've heard me say this, Quinny, on our show. I think the attribution on what happened over the summer is virtually impossible, except for the people that were directly involved. And even they might have a skewed version of their memory, given their own limitations that we all suffer from. Um, so, I mean, I'll give you my opinion based off of what I've heard, and kind of, to me, what makes sense logically is that the so-called Tisdale signings were the ones that were early in the summer, most likely. The cheap ones, the
The
ones
Gren,
that
Yamada, yeah,
Yamada, Inamura,
and Namura.
yeah, those were kind of low hanging fruit that, again, if you're Rogers, they're cheap, they're not really impacting anything. They're going to go out on loan anyway. I don't even know who they are, right? We all remember the summer. That I think there's some logic there. And then the ones late in the summer, I think, are harder because, by all accounts that I've heard, is there was a lot of this going on between, names being brought up and what Rogers wanted to do. And again, it's not like we don't have a history of Rogers at every single job he's been at having these issues with recruitment. Um, and so whether Tanetki was a Rogers signing or um, a Tisdale signing, I think probably somewhere in between, meaning that it got so messy towards the end of the window, and there was probably panic stations, which, not surprising, kind of happened the summer before when we ended up overpaying for, 3 players that, I'm on record on this, I think, of dubious fit to how we play, and I don't think they were smart signings at the time at any price, let alone the big overpays that we had. So I just think that devolves into a confirmation bias. Who's what camp are you in? And I think that's another clarifying part, I think, of what came out of Sunday, which is that there is you know a lot, and I use these terms with brevity. Okay, it's not this severe, but a degree of civil war that's devolved not only within the support, with all of the tensions with, Green Brigade stuff and all that other stuff with the collective, and now you're there at loggerheads to a degree. I think you've also got people that are in the Brendan camp versus the Tisdale camp, and you can maybe call that the Desmond camp. I don't know, relative to what's happened. So if you're in the Rogers camp, everything went to hell because of Tisdale and Desmond. And if you're in the board camp, then it was all Rogers' fault. And, as they always say, there's 3 sides to every story. So
Yeah,
it's probably somewhere in between. What I've said, I'm trying to remain patient because I don't think, and I'm being skeptical. Like, I don't have any delusions of grandeur that Paul Tisdale is, Tony Bloom's bastard child from a prior life. Right. So I don't have some kind of delusion that this guy is, um, some kind of rocket scientist or something, or figured out the secret to the universe. But I also don't think that it's fair to criticize everything that he did if it's not accurate. And I have no way of being accurate. I just don't know.
fair.
There's too much mud being slinged, too many axes to grind, too much hysteria. Um, I do know one thing so far that is likely the truth, which is that he was directly involved with Nancy being the new manager. And when and again, I don't pretend to have been up on the Columbus Crew or Nancy before those rumors started, but I went through the same process I did when we hired Ange. And I said this on our show, he graded out higher for me than what Ange did when I looked at Ange. And I'm not saying he's a better coach. What I'm saying is that my framework suggested that this guy, from what he can control, and this is always goes back to the problem, back to what Alan said, part of the reason why the way he communicates like a modern head coach is a positive, because he's talking about things he can actually control. He's not in delusion land that he's got managerial leadership superpowers and can impose his will and create a winning team. There's those kind of narratives are just nonsense from a actual methodology, process driven. How do you put a winning team on the pitch? It's not, I mean, that's the difference between a Wilfried Nancy and a Neil Lennon. Right? Neil Lennon's of that era, of that world. Like, I just throw the best players on the pitch and they'll figure it out and win the game. Well, there's somewhere between that and, like, let's have a first-class modern operation to put your players in the best positions possible so that their unique talents interconnect with one another to manifest in a team that's going to be a high-performance organization, right? One generation, next generation. And he's going to get slings and arrows all over the place because, again, the culture in Scottish football is still very antiquated, despite a fan movement that's saying they want to modernize. They're fish living in the fishbowl. All you know is water, right? I mean, that's and so Wilfried Nancy's coming from an environment that is completely different, where he's going to probably hear what's going on with this tactics board and go, what planet did I just drop into based off of where he just came from, right? It's like, you know, a different universe. But that goes back to Alan's point about resiliency, is that, again, what I looked at, he looks like a really resilient guy. Seems like a really smart guy. I don't think he's going to cower amongst the pressure here. I think his biography suggests that he's pretty resilient. I'm not saying he's going to concede. Ange didn't concede either. Like, Ange didn't, you know, he had his own way of dealing with this nonsense. And I suspect in his own different way, Nancy will do similar. And that includes getting advice. Like, I don't know how some of the selections and substitutions took place through a lens of like, this is how Wilfried Nancy plays. So maybe Nancy was testing things, or maybe there was a collaborative. I don't know. I suspect he'll figure things out pretty quickly, that certain guys can't play certain roles or shouldn't be really, and that there are better options. But again, he's 2 hours in the door, and he's not going to come in and just basically torch the opinion of a key assistant, whether it's Strachan or maybe Maloney said something to him. Like, you don't come into a new organization and say, you know what, fuck all you people. you're antiquated morons. Yeah. And I'm using that as hyperbole, right?
Yeah. Danny Clough tried that. It went really well.
Well, exactly. So you can't do that. So you've got to try and like work in between. And he's already being criticized for being radical and naive. Imagine if I'm just using this as a hyperbolic example. Imagine Tony Ralston started at right center back in a back three in that game, which, if you've studied him at Columbus Crew, that is as equally as coherent as Austin Trusty starting there, right? Yeah. I'm not saying either is what we want. I'm saying that there's a pathway of like, well, you know,
they could happen.
They both kind of make sense in their own way. It's less than ideal, but imagine the response had we lost yesterday and Tony Ralston was the right center back. I mean, people would be even more, you know, hair on fire. They'd be using as a cudgel to hammer him. So I think, you know, he'll probably do it in a thoughtful way, but it's going to be really bumpy, and he'll figure out quick, like who should he listen to, who's actually got good insights. I mean, the fact that we still don't have good set piece organization after all this time, what the hell's going on? Like, Alan and I have covered this enough on our show. Like, if us two dopes have a decent grounding on what's going on in the set piece dynamics in global football, and Celtic do not yet, like, I can't, who's responsible for that? And how are they still have a job? I mean, those are the kinds of things that this guy's going to say, boy, we need to figure something out here.
I was going to say on that as well, I think that is Strachan, you know, and again, when I was looking at the goal that Hearts scored, the second one, I know Nancy and everyone is just parachuted in, but surely there's infrastructure at the club that didn't just arrive off the plane on Thursday, that was kind of preparing for Hearts anyway, scouting their games, watching what they do from corners and such. And, you know, like that he only had one training session. I don't believe he totally tore up the match plan of who defends at corners and what we do from free kicks and everything, you know. So
it's impossible.
Yeah, it was a huge frustration as well. I would definitely take you on that. This kind of walks me a wee bit into the other point I wanted to raise up with you guys, and Alan, this would be a great point for you to come in on, is with the new, you know, we're only one game in. The manager's decided to start as he means to go on. We're going to go free at the back. We're going to try and box up midfield and so on and so forth with the wide players. I actually thought, as a wee preface to this, when he came in, the wide players would have been a little bit more fullbacky in this game, but they were very much like up and wide on the pitch, you know, and it was cheat code at times. Like you said, we broke their defense. I think the managers used similar verbiage along that side as well. But now that we can see how the team is kind of meant to look now all of a sudden, where do you guys see the squad standing? Because when we had the Rodgers O'Neill, the previous type of shape, even at the tail end of Ange, we're looking at weakness on wingers. We're looking at weakness on centre forwards. And now in this shape, I think the weakness at centre forward, like Ian Nacho or Johnny Kenny probably score at the weekend if they started, really, with some of the chances that came. But we still have the weakness at centre forward, I would say. In terms of the rest of the squad, I think maybe the weaknesses or the strengths, maybe, it's kind of changed a little bit. Because I'm not sure Liam Scales, I'm a big Scales fan, as a lot of people know. I'm not sure he's, I don't think he looked as comfortable in the middle of the three as what he has in other positions. I think Trussie's looked really good, for example. I thought Tierney was the best player at the weekend, if I can be honest. So that's what I wanted to get your thoughts and feelings on, is like the standing of the squad. Have we, like, if we think about Ralston as a right, he's not going to be right. He's not going to play wide right, if I can say that. Sorry, that's a weird tongue twister. And on the left side, like, you can't imagine Tierney doing that shift. Maybe Srirachi, So in terms of the squad standing, Alan, how do you see things maybe shaking out over the next few weeks and into the window?
It's a tough one. I mean, there's a fundamental truth, which is the lack of quality in the final third. And I keep repeating that because it's subjectively true. You just look at the quality and the goals and assists that were taken out of the squad, and look at the replacements that were brought in. So that is tough for anybody to work with. The right back situation since Johnson got injured, I think there's a big drop off. I think Donovan is promising, but I think Ralston, he had a golden patch under Ange, really. But he's not really recaptured that, for whatever reason, that level of performance since. So this lineup kind of solves for that a little bit. The one thing that is, I think, tricky, I actually thought on rewatch, because again we're all anchored in biases. So when I watched the game first time, I was getting frustrated at, like, Arne Engels because of him giving the ball away in the final third, is because he's just not built for quick one-touch passing football. He's very good, I think, in a more defensive role in giving the team structure, solidity, and he's also good at set piece delivery. I still maintain he has all the tools to play that right-sided wing back role, and I'd like to see him in that role. Actually, Yang was incredibly disciplined. He often was in the right back spot, I felt, on the weekend there. I thought he was very, and Yang is actually pretty robust as a defensive player. You got to give him credit for that. He just, unfortunately, like other forwards we've got, he's just not a great decision maker in and around the box. But so I think Engels would better suit that role. I think Hitati, who showed incredible form under Martin O'Neill. I mean, the last 4 or 5 games he's been terrific. I thought he was just wasn't in the game at all at the weekend, and when he did, he was back to wasteful Hitati. I just don't think he suits being in positions in the field where he's under a lot of pressure, or he has to receive the ball maybe with his back to goal. I think he's better with a bit of time and a bit of space. We can get his head up and he can play passes, or he can do that little acceleration away, and he can create space that way. And I think it would be a risk to have him and McGregor as the two in that midfield. I think on transition that could be problematic, but I think it would get the best of Tati from a creative perspective. And as I say, I think Engels would be better suited to that wing back role. He's great at getting balls from the right, banging them around the corner, banging them into the box. He's got a good engine. He's disciplined. He's athletic. I think Alistair Johnson is built for that right-sided centre back role. He's absolutely made for it. He plays it for Canada. He's got over 50 caps, more or less, playing in that position. He's an intelligent footballer. He's 5'11". He's strong enough. He's athletic enough. And I think Tierney, at this stage of his career, is built for that left-sided centre-back position. He's got enough latitude to get forward occasionally, but he's not doing that wing-back thing, which is an incredibly demanding role to play. I agree that Srirachi may be the best option on that, but then if you had Engels and Srirachi as your two, that's maybe you're then lacking a bit of creativity. The other further forward, I think both Balikwisha and Nigrin are really that sort of inside forward position is probably both of them their favoured positions. I mean, Nigrin was really poor at the weekend. He couldn't he couldn't create anything in that final third. He was hesitant when he got the ball near the box. He hasn't played for a while, so maybe that'll improve. Balak Wisha, we haven't seen, but I think if you get him into positions, he can play that quick one-touch passing game. I think that's probably his strength. That's his main attribute. It's not bombing up and down the wing. It's not ghosting past people. It's playing intelligent, quick passes. So I think they would suit it. I think Iheanacho would suit that position. If you look at when he was at his best for Leicester, it wasn't as a striker. It was as a sort of inside right forward with a striker ahead of him. So I think he would suit that position as well. So long story short, I think there's a lot in the squad that will suit that position. I thought maybe Scales was maybe wasted because he's probably the best passer. I know he's spotty, but he's probably the best passer that we had. And in that central role, he had the least impact on the game. And then he seemed to get frustrated, and every time he got the ball in the second half, he was just giving it away, trying to play stupid passes, which is a bit unlike him, really. He's normally very steady. So yeah, but I think there's potential. I think I said I did a piece earlier in the season, more or less outlining this formation. This is before we knew anything about Nancy. So I'll need to stand behind that and say that I do believe we have the players to play exactly that kind of formation.
Yeah.
One thing that worries me is it's having enough players of technical ability. This requires a lot of technical ability, more than sort of power and athleticism. It was very interesting to me when they showed, and you'll have picked this up, I'm sure, Quinny, when they showed the little snippet from training from Friday, and they were all doing these sort of 4v2 rondos, and essentially what Nancy is trying to do is to create these rondo situations in and around the box and have players that are able to do quick passes, create overloads, get space, get in behind quickly, disrupt defenders, pull people out of position. That's and I wouldn't be surprised if they spent hours doing those drills in training from now on to get that flowing really quickly. Whether we have enough players in the forward areas that are technically enough to do that under pressure, big question mark.
For sure. Just for you come in on that, James, I'm interested to hear how you see the squad standing. It was something I did kind of mean to bring up with that legacy element. You mentioned it before, Alan, there about like the substitutions that were used in the game. That was something I did find quite disappointing that we didn't try Balak Wisha into one of those positions. We maybe and I don't know if it would have been seen as conservative considering that we were losing the game or anything, but could you have maybe tried somebody like a Donovan coming into the situation later on in the match? And we didn't really see any of that. And yeah, that was part of the thing I did want to kind of bring up there, but I kind of got too tied up with the whole Gavin Strachan stuff and maybe just lost the point with it a little bit. But James, how do you see the standing of the squad, the suitability of a lot of the players we've got? Do we have new problems? Have we maybe walked away from some problems? Do we have more problems now? Maybe I don't know.
I think it depends on how quickly he gets people where they should be. And here I am sounding like I know what I'm talking about, but where I think they should be. Having looked at how he's done things in the past, and now I'm starting to get a more organic sense of how he plays. It's different, as watching tape and looking at clips versus watching full games and then going back and rewatching like Alan does all the time. I mean, you really do get a different experience in getting the kind of the fabric of what teams try to do. And so I think the Balak Wisha situation is a good example of legacy versus new, right? So I could see the substitution patterns on Sunday having an impact from the legacy thinking, because Balak Wisha has been terrible. He has been, because he's been played out of position in a system that doesn't make any sense for him, right? So if you come in and, hey, coach, like who should we put in here? Well, you don't put the guy in who stinks. You put the guy like McCowan, who's been doing a job for different managers, and he's done a good job at right wing, and he can play attacking midfield, right? So there's just a level of problem solving, I guess, is the way to think about it, that seems like legacy simplistic versus actual, like, what fits the situation, and how are guys going to perform in this specific system the way this specific manager is asking his players to play. And I think Engels being in central midfield is a good example of that. That's sounds very legacy to me. I'd be surprised if that's where Nancy ends up seeing him eventually. Trusty at right center back makes no sense in this system. He's either going to be in the middle or he doesn't make sense at all, because I think it's questionable if his passing is sophisticated enough, his risk taking on the ball is solid enough, and he might have to do a job until eventually that changes. But I think he has to be central if he's going to play in this back three. And I think you'll see other guys that maybe like Balakwisha, maybe Inamura, that have very specific skill sets that suit this type of system. Like Alan said, either deep lying playmaking like Inamura, having that intersection of risk taking with their line breaking pass and actually being able to do it, right? So that's you can coach up a guy to want to do it more, like maybe Engels, and they just don't really have that ability to do it. And we have a glorious proxy for all of this in the league this season, which is Motherwell, which is they've come in with this just incredible style of play that their manager's deploying with players that aren't necessarily at a world-class level in some elements. And guess where they're struggling? In the final third, right? It's not easy to do this kind of very orchestrated, and I mean that in the sense of, as much symphony as jazz, right? I think that's what Nancy tries to do, is mix those two things, having structure, but also allowing your creative players like Iheanacho, when he gets on, hopefully eventually, like Balakwisha, that maybe have a little bit of that. I think McGregor has it. At times, McGregor to me is a guy who might get unleashed a bit under Nancy, maybe even to his own uncomfortableness, because he's gotten so comfortable not being aggressive, not stepping into space, not playing those central balls and trying to through balls. And that going back, just to circle back, the part that I don't know, I want to be curious on what you think, having watched the game back. What to me, even with all of the poorly played passes, I mean, the optimistic part was there was acres of space everywhere. I mean, that first half,
Yeah.
it was like this could be like not an XG or a shot perspective, but it's like there was so much space here. This could be a 4-0 first half if we were on it and had the players. I mean, we had them pulled all over the place.
Agreed.
Right? I mean, it was
Yeah.
like diabolically bad how skewed it was towards Celtic in that kind of basic fundamental of space, using space. How do you get to that point where you've got enough players that can capitalize on that? And how much can you coach up guys versus what's their natural capability, and back to player fit, role fit, and all that other stuff. So that's the optimistic part. Is that the hard part is creating that space.
Yeah.
Like that's really hard to do against teams that are reasonably well coached and organized, have good athletes, have good players. So I think that's going to be the make or break of what we're trying to do here, is getting the right players in the right positions. And I just think the orthodox way that people kind of think about these things, like a back three, like it doesn't apply to how this guy coaches and the way he plays his teams. Like it's just a different way that he does things. Where I saw Tierney at right center back at one point. I was like, how the hell did he get there? It wasn't off like a corner or something. It was because of the movement and the rotations and everything. And that, as wonderful and entertaining as that can be, it does take a little bit of time for guys to like learn. But I meant to come back to this. So Alan, when we did lose the ball, which was a ton because we were awful in capitalizing on the space, it seemed to me that we were really organized and pack hunting on the counter pressing. Like it wasn't just guys running around headless chicken style. I have to eat those words now, given my preview with Cammie Devlin. But like they had a hard time really doing anything productive because we were so cutting off the pitch and having guys cutting off passing lanes. I mean, it looked really, really good. Am I crazy?
No.
This is one of the other reasons why I'm optimistic, is that people get fixated on back three, and all sort of stuff, right? But the actual way that Nancy wants this team to play is not a huge leap
No.
different to how we've played under Postecoglou and how we played under Rodgers. It really isn't.
Yep.
We're going to play a high line, tick. We're going to be a very aggressive counter-pressing team, tick. And guess what? We're actually very good. Rodgers was very good at coaching those players to be very effective in the counter-press, and that was very evident against Hearts. Now, I couldn't tell if the Hearts were dreadful on the ball because they're dreadful on the ball, or because our pressing was so good they had no time to move the ball forward. It's probably a combination of both of those things, but we were very effective in that regard. And again, that's not a million miles away from how we were trying to, creating overloads in wide areas and getting bodies, into the front line was exactly what Ange tried to do. This isn't massively different. The slight difference is the shape of the team's a little bit different, and um, he will encourage players to go quite far out of position if they think they can affect the play in a positive way. And that will be a little bit uncomfortable, and it may lead to some horrible transition moments. But against, as we've seen under Ange, against the vast majority of the teams in this league, will simply overwhelm them, providing we've got good enough quality in the final third. Big caveat. Otherwise, we're left to suffer at the hands of the variance that we saw at the weekend. Goal from a corner, tick. That first goal. So I talked to Quinny. One of my little cliches is that you do three things go wrong in a row in the final in your defensive third. It inevitably leads to something horrible happening. Well, what happens when there's five things in a row go wrong? That's exactly what the first goal was. I mean, you have Tierney tries to play the ball up the line. It hits a Hearts player, and it absolutely boomerangs back up the pitch. Not out of play. Hearts guy gets to it first to such an extent that Engels has to, put in a flying tackle to try and stop the cross coming in, such that he ends up sliding out of play. Right. So hold that thought. Then the ball comes into the box, but Scales manages to clear it. And despite probably there being like a 5-3 overload of Celtic players, the Hearts players in the box, it goes straight to a Hearts player, right? Then he heads it back in, and Braga comes from behind Trusty to win the header. Trusty, of course, it's very difficult to defend somebody who's coming from behind you if you're a central defender. That very rarely ever happens because he is actually onside because Engels has had to, such a dramatic piece of defending. He's ended up, in the bottom row of the stand, and maybe he's a bit slow to recover. The ball, that ball then flies to Milne, who completely miskicks it. It's a disaster of a shot, which then gets caught immediately under McGregor's feet with Braga right on top of him, who's then able to, dispossess him and score. There's five things there, all broke Hearts' way in a row. Now you could argue that maybe could McGregor have reacted quicker? Could Engels have done better to get back on side? Could Scales have been a bit more, accurate with his clearance, etc., etc., etc. These are all fair points, but that's a lot of variance in one moment to go, to go against you. And I guess when your luck is out, it's out. I think what was disappointing though was just the reaction after that of the, everything. It just seemed to suck the life out of everybody. But let's take that first 43 minutes. I think there's still a lot to build on there.
I was just going to say, and I'll add a sixth to it, which is that's Braga's superpower. He's a chaos merchant in the box. I mean, he is. That's what he's really good at, and it happened to fall to him, who, by the way, had been set up as a left winger in a 4-2-3-1 by Derek McInnes. So again, when you go back to the attribution of like who came up with a better game plan, and there were aspects to Hearts, letting Trusty have the ball was smart. I mean, that's a lot of teams have done that to our center backs, including Carter Vickers, by the way. It's not his strength either. He's not a ball playing progressive player under duress or against a well-structured quality team. So credit to Hearts and McInnes for setting that up. But, the way things went in that first half, it was, I think it's hard to argue. I was being very positive about Nancy coming in and being able to do that this fast. I don't think Hearts made it difficult for him to do that on a relative basis in the first half, the way they set up. I think they made it fairly easy for this transition to happen in the first half. And then there was, to Alan's point, the goal changed it, and then Hearts made some tweaks at halftime, which I know, wait for it, brought out that horrible tactics board, because then we had to make a change and make changes. You know, it's a radical idea, passing information to players during a game, because Cal McGregor does not have a global camera up above the stadium to be able to see everything that's going on universally with omnipotence at all times.
We've complained for all since Roger's return how little he switches things up during a game, and suddenly we have a guy who's trying to communicate with his players. English isn't his first language, right? His one of his big selling points is clarity. He's trying to be clear by giving them a visual picture. It's pouring with rain. If he couldn't use a whiteboard, he probably couldn't use a bit of paper and a pen because it's pouring with rain. So he uses a visual tool to communicate to his players that he wants these changes to be made. But none of this matters, by the way, if Celtic win. It's completely irrelevant if Celtic win, which tells you it's completely irrelevant.
Totally. I had a huge penny drop moment there when you mentioned your slogan, your catchphrase there, because when I was doing my breakdown of the match, I was going through my analysis of the same goal, and basically everything you just said there. I only counted 3, right? But I kind of walked myself into it as I was going through it. I'm like, there's one mistake, and then I was like, here's a second mistake. And see, by the time I finished it, I was like, I'm pretty sure. I was like, so who else says that 3 mistakes equals a goal? And I sat on it for about 10 seconds. I was recording the video and stuff, so I quickly kind of moved on. But see, as soon as you said that, I'm like, of course it's you that says that, Alan. Of course.
Quinny, you're labeling these as mistakes, and again,
you know what I mean. You know what I mean. Things that happen against you.
I think it's a good faith debate to have, to say, was it a mistake, or was it just in the chaotic nature of football, when the ball's pinging about like that, bad stuff happens. The ball falls to the wrong player in the wrong spot as far as you're concerned. And when 5 of these things happen at once, again, we can have a good faith debate of saying, well, is it 60% Trusty's fault? All that. But when all these things stack up, guess what? You're in trouble.
That's why even in the world where, Real Madrid has a 20th place team to play in La Liga, they lose to them sometimes. And even when they play okay, is because sometimes crazy crap happens. I mean, that's the very nature of the sport, which is, I don't know about unique, but very specific to football. Everyone that's been involved with youth soccer, I mean, it's like one team just completely dominates the ball, has the ball the entire game and can't score. And then one kid breaks away and goes down and scores and wins the game, right? How many times have we all seen this? I mean, it's just the way that it works. So I think that's the real, again, I've been very optimistic here. There's a lot of risk that goes along with all of this because of it's perilous. I mean, it's such a pressure cooker now. You have this, civil war going on in multiple dimensions. You've got this ecosystem around these people that just arrived in Glasgow now. How are they going to react? Like, we can say we're confident and all that. It's not easy. Like, this is an absolute cauldron. They're going to get media stuff now. Every media interaction they have with people from, the BBC, et cetera, now is going to be asking them the dumbest questions. We know this. And that grates on people. How are they going to respond to that? So it's just how these people are able to deal with it, I think, is as optimistic as we can be based off of the football itself. There's a lot of questions.
Yeah. One thing I've been thinking in the aftermath of this is there was a lot made on like Martin O'Neill having a chat with him as he came into the building, and by all accounts that happened. The number one person he should be speaking to is Ange, isn't it? For like somebody who's walked in the shoes that he's walking in now, like completely. You can imagine Ange would give him some proper advice, like this is what to do to make sure this guy doesn't mug you off, or when you go away to this place, don't fall for this trick, or different bits and bobs. That would be an interesting one. The last thing I did want to bring up with you guys and get your take on and hear your perspective on, as I mentioned a few times, I've been fanboying. I'm a huge fan of your guys working the content you guys do, and I've been listening to you for years. I had to ask you precisely how long it's been. It's been over 5 years at this point. And with the introduction of the new manager, Nancy, like we've kind of referenced, it's not a huge departure from maybe what we've maybe tried with Ange, and you might even want to stretch it. Maybe you could put Dyla somewhat into this category of sorts, but maybe it's because it's free at the back and it's a bit more, there's no subtlety here, you know. Whereas with Ange, the Greg Taylor thing was kind of like, yeah, we kind of did play the three at the back at times, you know. Taylor, I used to call him the best attacking midfielder in the club when he was on it, you know. And so my point being is, I would love to hear your guys' perspective on like where we're at right now with the squad, because like over the last couple of seasons, I've felt, I know you guys have, and certainly other fans, we've been in a position of strength and we've maybe failed to capitalise upon it. Now, like you say, James, you kind of set us up for this quite nicely. There's a multi-dimensional thing going on at Celtic, you know, from top to bottom, on the pitch, the boardroom, and everywhere else in between. Where do you guys, in terms of like the last 5 years, thinking about like the quality of the squad, the direction, we have been in a position of strength before. Where are we right now? You know, is the club still in, or you know, how do you see things progressing in terms of where the squad is and now where we've been in this kind of the beginning of a new chapter? Kind of butchered that, but I've tried my best. Sorry.
I mean, listen. I mean, I don't want to get into the whole, you know, sort of fan collective and all that sort of stuff in the sense of, you know, airing lots of grievances. But you know, one of the things that maybe we could, as a fan base, do a little bit better is articulate exactly what are the issues that we see and why is it such a problem? Because otherwise, you just risk this sort of entitlement label. You know, you've won all these trophies and you're complaining all the time. You're just entitled. But actually, the way I would try and articulate it is that yes, we have won lots of trophies, but I just think if you study football and you look at it globally and you understand the macroeconomic environment of football, you know, the team with the biggest wage bill will generally win, more often than not, to a ridiculous degree. Celtic have got, by far the biggest wage bill in Scotland, so of course they should win it. And that's not entitlement speaking. That's just, as I say, the economics of modern football. Sadly, really, that there is such disparity in the sport. Not the same as when I was growing up, for sure. Um, so so I look at it. I look at it from that starting point in terms of the expectations of how the club should be performing. And my biggest criticism, I suppose, of the football club is that they simply measure themselves and view their own performance in a completely skewed and unrealistic way. They just see Scottish Premier League titles, Scottish Cups, money in the bank, tick, we're successful, we are doing a fantastic job. And it's actually more complicated, or it should be more complicated than that. It should be, how should we be performing in the league and how should we be performing in Scottish domestic cups relative to the financial advantages we have got? Because we shouldn't just be winning; we should be winning in style and almost obliterating the opposition like we did, for a while under Ange. But really, therefore, because of the overwhelming financial advantage, having the biggest stadium, the most matchday revenue, having regular access to Champions League income, which has distorted so many leagues across Europe, your only true measure, I think, on benchmarking should be against clubs in Europe. And how are you performing on that basis? Because that's where the real glory is, or it should be. That should be where the targets are, is what are the trends in European football especially, but world football really? How are Celtic performing relative to those? Not only in performance on the field, but performance off the field in terms of the structure, the capabilities, all of that, all of the skills in the building, the roles, the responsibilities, all of those things. That should be how we're benchmarking ourselves, because frankly, we keep over a period of 7 to 10 years, we've continually lost Champions League qualifiers to teams the size of Falkirk, that come from towns the size of Falkirk, like Midtjylland, right?
Yeah.
And that is such a trend now. It's a pattern. So underlying that pattern is a pattern of behaviour and a pattern of performance. And what is that? It's a failure to recognise that you're not doing as good a job as you think you are. It's a failure to recognise that this is the direction that the top level elite football is moving in. And are we moving in the same direction in terms of structure, roles, responsibilities, capabilities, all those things? Such to the extent that even if you compare Celtic's performance on things like transfers, and certainly in performance on the field in terms of progress in European competition, we are kind of nudging up against the Midtjyllands, as opposed to what we should be doing is competing with teams that are maybe the 5th or 6th best in the top 5 leagues, and the likes of your Benficas and your Portos and your Ajaxes and Feyenoords and all that sort of thing, because they've broadly got the same similar sized wage bills as Celtic do. So that's where the way I would look at this, and I just want the people that are running Celtic to really be a bit harsher and more challenging on themselves, to look at the world as it is in Europe and say, are we really doing a great job here? Don't rest on your laurels. Challenge yourselves and say, well, why aren't we competing like we are? Why do we keep missing out on Champions League income? Because that's galling. It would kill Scottish football, by the way, because if we had actually achieved the Champions League campaigns that we should have done, had we been prepared in the transfer window and had the drive, the energy, the vision of those running the football club in the background to actually get deals over the line and to be ran in a coherent way, Scottish football would be just ridiculously even more uncompetitive than it is now. All Celtic can do and aspire to do is to be the best version of themselves. The problem of structuring European football and Scottish football to be as competitive as we can be is a completely separate subject that Celtic should be trying to push positively. But we should be trying to be the best version of ourselves, and I don't think we do. I think we're complacent. I think we're a bit arrogant, therefore, and I don't think we're testing ourselves and challenging ourselves as a club in a way that we should.
I would agree with all that. James, yourself?
Well, this is where my normal brand revisits. I mean, all of this glowing positivity could not last long. And I put it under the guise of multiple things can be true at the same time, which is one of my things I say to my kids, and they hate it. They're so sick of hearing me say it. And so as positive as I think Nancy is relative to what he can actually control, I think the ecosystem in which he's operating is perilous. I have no other way to. I think that's a good simple word. And I was taught that analogies are good to introduce. Typically analogies are bad ways to explain things, but when they're used to introduce a kind of a fresh idea to people, they can be useful. It's like what's a zebra? Well, it's kind of like a horse. Well, it doesn't make a zebra a horse, so keep that in mind. That's what I'm about to do. I'm prepping you. So I think Celtic could be Anderlecht. That's the risk. That's what I think is perilous. And of course, we're not Anderlecht. Scotland is not Belgium. What do I mean by it? Well, I think the hollowing out of our competitive standing that Alan's benchmarking with Europe has been clear and obvious for a decade now. All of the failures, we could, list them off. Molde, everything. I mean, it's just all the way back to Sion, whatever you say, that we got bailed out with under Lennon. So you're literally talking at least 10 years of all gutting. Well, what is that? When has that taken place? We just happen to be in the midst of this analytics revolution, the data revolution that's taken place. Not unique to football, by the way. We have 25 years in other major sports to kind of map how these things tend to play out. Okay. And that's why I think it's perilous, is because that hollowing out that's clear and obvious when you properly benchmark was masked by playing in Scotland because of the financial resource gap, the culture of Scottish football, where there's been no innovation, very slow degree of adoption. And I see major risks on multiple fronts, some of which I had no clue was happening, i.e. Motherwell might be turning into Bodo Glimt. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm saying that's what they're trying to do, it looks like. Okay. And if they give Askew equity on player trading, maybe he'll stick around long enough, like they've been able to do with Knutson at Bodo Glimt. I think he gets a cut of players they sell, that kind of thing. So people are wondering why he's living in Norway still. He's making a pretty good bankroll on player sales, part of the picture anyway. For all of the glorious fun that we're having at the expense of Rangers and the new ownership, they are directionally heading in that way with a lot of screw ups already, and maybe they'll continue to screw it up, but it's a directional process that other teams haven't gone through, and they're well resourced. They could end up Club Brugge is what I'm saying, or at least directionally towards a Club Brugge in the Belgium analogy. And then we have Hearts, which is the obvious analog there is USG.
Mhm.
And as much fun as I'm having making fun of Derek McInnes's decision making this season, and their CEO and their director of football having really seemingly no clue as far as how USG's achieved what they've achieved, that's my assessment of it anyway, and delighting in that character flaw of mine, is that I think they will.
Well, love you for it. Well, love you for it, James.
They will eventually get there, right? So if we do not recognize these challenges and these direct competitive threats, and why I think it's perilous is because the normal human order is you act after the fire has already started. You don't prevent the fire, particularly when you're complacent. You know, it's like, everything's fine, and then the light, the match lights, and poof, it goes up on you, and you're like, holy shit, I should have been more prudent about this. So I suspect it'll be more reactive. And the problem with this is that when you're in an industry that is highly competitive, quickly evolving, and having new tools coming in to the sphere, you know, again, this is business school's douche stuff, but it's called an S curve. You can't catch up by saying, oh, gee, that's a threat. Look what Hearts are doing. Let's get to where they're at. It's going to take us 3 years to do that. No. You've got to figure out where Hearts is going to be in 3 years, or who the new Tony Bloom is going to be in 3 years that figures out an even better mousetrap than what Tony Bloom is doing, and skate to that puck, to use an old hockey metaphor. Right. So that's why I think it's perilous, is we'd have to innovate right now to catch up where we should have been 5 years ago. Innovate. Like, that's the Tisdale model. If Desmond's relented to basically let Tisdale cosplay as a director of football without calling him a director of football, and he's got an algorithm that better matches player fit and whatever, well, that's all better than the crap that we've been dealing with, which has been a complete abject train wreck. That's still nowhere near where we need to be now, and it's sure as hell not going to get us to where we need to be in 3 years. So that's, I think in 3 years' time, we run the risk of being Anderlecht. And I think that is a clear present danger. And I would actually argue it's probably the more likely scenario at this point, with a lot bigger question mark around all the risks at Rangers, which are legit. And we've talked about extensively on the Huddle Breakdown. But I just don't see a pathway to us. And I think that's ultimately what the Desmond experience, I'll call it that, both the public letters and Ross Desmond's performance at the AGM suggest, which is that there is a obstinance about that. And it may be from Dermot, I don't know, Mr. Desmond. It may be at that level, man, that even if there are people, and I think there have been people at the club that want to modernize, but again, it's just a catchphrase. You know, we're way past using analytics and data. I mean, the idea that should even be a debate at this point is moronic. You have to get world class at doing these things. You have to get at least functionally competitive at doing these things if you're going to compete at certain levels. And we're so far beyond, far away from that it's kind of ominous.
Yeah, I think perilous is certainly a good way of putting it. And when these conversations come up, when you're talking about like the chances we've missed to qualify for the Champions League and some of the other kind of soft benchmarks, I think the Anderlecht comparison is brilliant, because for my age, I'm 37. When I was growing up, Anderlecht was the big Belgian team. They were always in the Champions League. They always had, if any good Belgian players were coming through, they probably came through at Anderlecht, maybe a wee bit of Bruges or whatever. But I know from just what I do with football nowadays and all the rest of it, but Anderlecht over the last 5 years have been in the Europa Conference League once, maybe twice, maybe the Europa League once. They have been, they're a fallen giant at this stage in Belgium. And that maybe is part of the worry when you hear Ross Desmond saying, like, if you swing and you miss and all that stuff. But I then kind of think about your Salzburg as types of examples. We were talking about the domestic dominance earlier, Alan. Like, Salzburg won 13 or 14 leagues in a row. And yeah, that might be like gluttonous for a Celtic fan to want that or whatever, right? But it's kind of like what we're talking about before with like a process over results, where if you get that prolific, like Salzburg, if you look at those And I think they didn't really do much in Europe, so they're not a perfect example, right? But over that time, they were battering teams in their league 5-0 all the time. And then, do you know what? See, when they did go into Europe and maybe play in the Champions League group stages, they could take a team like AC Milan and beat them 1-0 or draw 2 each, because when you're when you're that high on the dominance chart, the reps where, yeah, you score 6 against Motherwell, yeah, you score 4 against Hearts. Kind of Ange had us in that period for a little while where scored 4 goals wasn't really unusual, and it was like, could we get a cricket score today? That was kind of the situation we got to. And those benchmarks, we've not had them. Ange maybe brought a wee bit of them to the party, and I don't want to bring them up too much. It's a bad habit I've got, sadly. But I kind of hope where we're at right now, because of how, when you listen to all the official communications from the club, like you were saying there, James, like, to talk about analytics in the conversation is redundant at this point, where the train has left the station on that. It's people like us have maybe been chatting about this for like 5, 6, 7 years, in terms of looking abroad and going, wow, Celtic, imagine we tried that, how good things would be. But when you hear them talk, they really do believe that they're doing everything in that vein, and that kind of worries you as much as anything, I suppose, doesn't it? Because if they believe that they are, oh, we're on that track. What are you talking about? We play with data. We have spreadsheets. We're up with all the tech. It's worrying, isn't it? But I think January will kind of reveal a lot. One thing you mentioned, Paul Tisdale playing a bit of cosplay. The January window is absolutely mega, I think, at this stage. And to kind of, I was interested to hear from you guys in terms of where we're at, and that kind of bird's eye view of how you've seen the squad kind of move on over the last couple of years. I find it really interesting, and even thinking into the future, I think it's something that hopefully with a Nancy type appointment, because like you were talking about before, it's maybe the first coach, I would even include Ange in this, where you can establish really clear patterns of play that could maybe be integrated back into reserves and into youth teams, etc., where you might then have the ability to actually integrate players further on down in the road. And it felt like with Ange and with Brendan, we had a change in structure to B team copies first team, and that became quite important because of how Ange worked, I suppose. But it really needs to be the club plays in a way, and we really try and find somebody that best suits that. And I guess we all kind of hoped at the time that maybe Ange was imposing a modern style of play, and the B team's copying what Ange is doing, and all the youth team. This might be like the Celtic way for a while. We might try and find another Ange, which we didn't, of course, and all the rest of it. And maybe a bit of the hope is maybe Nancy, maybe the club get a second chance. It's somebody kind of doing their work for them and reverse engineering a player pathway model and a play style and an identity and routes to goal and that kind of thing.
I think with Ange, though, Ange was a lot more, let's call it, old school than perhaps maybe he was very much the cult of personality, the big man in charge of everything. Ultimately, deals that got done under Ange were because his best mate ran one of the biggest football agencies in world football and could get things done. It wasn't through some because if you're going to be at the absolute top end of this game in terms of recruitment, you're not using Scout. You are bringing in some incredibly intelligent people, and you're trying to emulate Tony Bloom. You're basically writing your own algorithms. You're writing your own specific bespoke algorithms that are tailored to the specific context of the type of player that you want, the environment that you operate in, and what you need from those players. You're not going to get that from StatsBomb or Scout. That is top end. Do you have that capability? And these are incredibly clever people. And it needs to be then integrated wholly into the football operation. Because the big risk with Nancy is that Ange could survive he came in one guy. He'd work with whoever. Such was his power of personality. He would just simply steamroller his way through anyway. Nancy's not like that. Nancy's got more of the sort of demeanor of a school teacher than a Jock Stein or an Alex Ferguson type of character. He expects there to be a fully functioning departments behind him that do all this stuff and are really good at it, because I suspect that's what they had at Columbus Crew, and he just gets on with the coaching. And if he then comes in and finds, well, hang on, who's doing that? Who's doing this? And they expect me to do that? Hang on, that's not. I'm here to coach the football team. Then, as James says, we're in real trouble. And I suspect, my fear is that's where we'll end up.
James?
No, I'll echo what Alan said there. That's definitely a risk. So yeah, I'll just put a pin in it there.
Fair enough. On that note, guys, it's been an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate every minute and every all the time you've managed to spare with me today to join us here on the channel. It's been an absolute pleasure. Do you want to, again, anyone that's watched this will definitely know all about you, but if you want to just maybe give anyone listening who hasn't found the Huddle Breakdown just maybe a little flavour of what to expect from the content you guys put out there?
Yeah, so we have a Substack. It's huddlebreakdown.com. So we do the free pod that's available without commercial there for people that give us their email address so we can drip you. We don't kill you with too many emails, but basically just get updated with everything that we put out. And then we do the Extra Time podcast late in the week, which is, usually, I don't know, between an hour to 2 hours, where we do more deep dive into, as we joke, the spreadsheet shagging. So it's really getting into the analytics and how we analyze things throughout a robust process, right? It's not, we do actually watch games. I know it's stunning that people think we live in spreadsheets, et cetera, but and then a lot of written content. That's the other thing. So really, like beat writers, looking at topics constantly, writing different types of analytics focused pieces, because we're basically just trying to figure out, like, why are things happening, and what can we use out of that to extrapolate, and what might happen in the future, which is pretty hard, by the way. So if for people that are interested in that type of deep dive type of information, the other thing we've done is we've created our own little community in the chat area. We've kind of extracted ourselves mostly. I do a lot of winding up of Hearts fans this season. That's my one thing on Twitter. But generally, outside of that, we're in our own little ecosystem so that we don't offend people that don't want to be dealing with all the XG and the spreadsheet shaggers. So in our chat area on Substack's a very dynamic, fun place where a lot of smart people. It's I think exceeded our expectations. We have a lot of people in there, a lot of conversations where we don't even have to be directly involved anymore. It's kind of created its own little life, which has been fun to see. So yeah, that's it.
If you don't mind me saying as well on your behalf, that I love listening to content, whether it be Celtic or otherwise, where when I click on it, I cannot know what you're going to say, or I'm not going to listen to it. And one thing I love about you guys is really, no matter what, I've got no idea what you're going to say. I'm always really interested, like, what did you guys think of the game at the weekend? What did you guys think of this? What did and even though, like you say, like, when you listen to content, you maybe get to know people, who they like and who they don't like and stuff like that. But you guys are very good at checking yourself, very aware of biases and stuff like that. And with all the articles that I see stuff putting out, a lot of effort goes into it, some nice visuals, some great use of data. And I highly recommend all the stuff you guys put out. The last little thing I'll say on it, and I don't know if if you were going to come in and say something, I've stood on your toes here, but with what you were saying before, it always does amaze me, and it was something I mentioned on a show recently to give you your props, Alan. But it always amazes me how Celtic have never got in touch with you, because you have a data set that's worth some money, man. Like, it's been properly curated and put together specifically to, now it's obviously, you've not done it for world football, I get that, but how they don't try and implement the data you've even amassed always blows my mind personally. Maybe they're in your Substack and they're getting you cheap, who knows.
Well, I will share a world exclusive with you, Quinny. This is the carrot that I am going to dangle as an expression of our gratitude for how good you've been to us and being on our channel. Now, we can't speak to the veracity of this, so we don't know for sure. And I'm not going to make it public, but I'll send you the screenshot. Is a former manager of Rangers, an email that looked like his email from Rangers, subscribed to our Substack at one point. So
you've just stirred up all the right people, by the way.
Right. So it looks Alan's seen the screenshot of it. It looks legit.
Yeah, it looks legit. It was surprising.
Yeah,
at rangersfc.co.uk.
Correct. So I don't. It could have been somebody doing a fraud type of thing. I didn't pick it up. Actually, it was after he left. One of the many that have left. And so yeah, That's your
Love that.
exclusive, Quinny.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks for sharing. That's a great one.
Join Rangers managers and subscribing to Huddle Breakdown.
It's the only place you get objective opinion about them, isn't it? To be honest.
By the way. Yeah, for sure. But yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. To anyone that's watched this, if you're still here at the very, very end, you're an absolute psycho and we love you. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, retweet, all that good stuff, everyone. Hail, hail, and fingers crossed and on the hoops, I guess.